going to talk to a customer now who is a very experienced practitioner, both of providing a robot for every person and democratizing development. We'd like to welcome Kevin Crone, who is the Intelligent Automation Leader Partner at PwC. Welcome, Kevin. It's great to see you today.
Hey, Kevin.
Thanks for being here. So, Kevin, I just mentioned PwC is a real pioneer in automation, and you've been doing this since the early days. So what drove the initial motivation for PwC's digital transformation?
Sure. So rewinding the clock back maybe 4 years ago, as we were going through the starts of our own transformation, we looked at this from kind of two lenses. One lens was kind of big investments in the center that we could make, and we, at the time, had been implementing Salesforce and Workday and doing some big kind of system, I'll call big systems implementation work. But as we looked at what I'll term the client service aspect of our business, PwC is one of the world's largest professional services firms. We have three primary lines of business: assurance, tax, and advisory. As we looked at the challenge of digitizing that business, we really had to think differently about this, because we knew kind of upfront if we tried doing this from a top-down perspective, we would be at it for the next 100 years. And we knew that if we didn't think creatively about the types of tools that would be appropriate for automating processes in terms of our client service, it would be a big challenge to do this from a kind of single big technology platform implementation. That led to the creation of what we call our Year Tomorrow program, which was really aimed at hitting a couple of goals. One was to think about how we deliver better value and better insights to our clients in a more digitally enabled manner at a lower cost. Sounds fairly basic, but that was really the guidepost for how we thought about our transformation. From that, the big concept that we really drove home and embedded was we have to have our workforce play a major role in that transformation for two purposes. One, those are the individuals that know the business the best and know what they do, and being able to actually use them as our biggest weapons was going to create an advantage. The second part was from a change management perspective and how we viewed operating the business in the long run. Unless we started to embed skills of the future into our workforce, we didn't think we were serving our employees well and not setting them up for success in the future, whether it's at PwC or elsewhere.
Right. So, Kevin, you saw the flywheel that Diego took us through. Did you do something similar to that at PwC, or how did you get automation to take off with your employees at PwC?
Yeah, so part of, maybe I'll get to the question in a second, but just to give some context on how we actually got automation to our employees. Part of the citizen-led concept, and again, we started this in 2017 when I think no one understood what the heck we were talking about when we would put out that concept, was really around providing upskilling to all of our employees. So in the US, it's 55,000 employees. And we looked at this kind of from two levels. One was a baseline level of knowledge on all things digital, RPA being one of those things. But the goal was really to give people the ability to recognize where technology could help solve a problem and understand how technology would change their day-to-day work. And then we then offered a second level of upskilling, which was to actually get hands-on experience in using tools and have access to those tools. So part of that hands-on experience was just making UiPath available to our workforce in its entirety and giving them the appropriate training. So for those that had the capacity to actually participate, they would get the chance to build. It was interesting as I was watching the automation flywheel piece. I would say our program, from Diego's kind of beginning parts, didn't necessarily start as a COE where the COE was basically going out and getting ideas from the entire workforce and building solutions, and we eventually added citizen-led on. In our case, our original kind of COE within PwC was focused mostly on a small portion of our back office functions. As we really looked towards client service, we actually started with the citizen-led piece before kind of getting into the professional development. And the idea was twofold. We assumed, and I think this proved out from the experience, most of the solutions are going to be developed by citizens who are probably not technologists by trade, generally tend to be smaller task level automations. Effective, yes, and in some cases we had some very effective solutions built, but it wasn't necessarily going to create in itself the major transformation bit. But I think the really interesting part that we saw was by creating an ecosystem where you have that center still very active and not just governing solutions that are created, but actually studying the solutions that are created and understanding where people's pain points are. It's actually giving the inspiration and the process intelligence that you need to actually create the more center-led type solutions and some of the more complicated end-to-end solutions, which may involve AI, may involve other technologies that are embedded. So you could almost think of it, from our side, it was kind of the citizens drove the COE versus the COE kind of matured and then drove the citizens.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. I mean, that's what we'd love to see, where the citizens are now driving the COE. I think a couple things to unpack from that is, you guys were so early. I think before COEs really knew what we knew a COE was going to look like. You've been doing this for such a long time that I think you guys are the pioneers in many, many, many ways around the whole journey. Something that you said, I want to pick up on. You talked about you sort of combined upskilling and future-proofing employee skills with automation. And, that convergence is really interesting to me. Could you talk a little bit about that and what the benefits have been for PwC in converging those two initiatives?
Sure. It's interesting, and just like throwing out, maybe I'll take this from a market perspective for a second, because I think some of the stats are really interesting. Our own CEO survey that goes out every year, stats that have come from the World Economic Forum, from other sources, show a couple of consistent themes when we're talking kind of top of the house. One is the increasing gap between skills that exist in organizations today and the view of what skills are needed in the future to be productive in one's job. And the fact that most CEOs don't feel like they're making much progress from an upskilling perspective, and investments in this area have generally been either underinvested or money's been invested in the wrong way. I think that was a theme we recognized early on as we were setting out the strategy for this program. And on the face of it, our goal was to reinvent how we deliver work and think about how we could deliver more value with less resources, right? And think about how our business kind of goes from a business that in professional services that's historically measured on pure people to a people and technology business. That sounds basic again, but that was a major cultural shift for us. In order to get there and actually realize that, we knew that the employee piece was going to be really important, because we needed to really make them part of this journey. And the only way we were going to get there was really by focusing on upskilling. I think the piece that really, at least for me, resonated, our senior partner, who's our CEO for the US, he talks about the concept of leave no person behind. And we made a commitment to our workforce that if you wanted to lean in and get the training, we would make this available for you. And that was important, because it gave people a purpose for why this was important. It was important both to the success of the company, to the success of their jobs, and to the success of their future career, again, whether it's with us or elsewhere. And I think that's been a huge success factor for us, because it really kind of got people excited, and taking someone who maybe is an accountant and has a background in finance, and saying, no, it's important that you're learning RPA, data analytics, visualization, other tools, is kind of change people's thoughts on what their career could look like long term. And so all of that's happening while we're trying to think about how do we pump out as many automations as possible that are ultimately going to have the benefit of digitizing the business. If I compare and contrast that quickly with some of our clients, I think you constantly have change management challenges with people fearing their jobs are at risk from automation. And I think this is one of the ways in which you get over that.
So speaking of your clients, Kevin, how are you using all this learning that you've acquired inside of PwC? How do you bring that to your clients? How are you helping them?
So, as we've gone on this journey, we've learned a lot over the past couple of years. There's some things we did right. There's some things that we probably would have done differently had we been starting from scratch. But one of the things that we've really undertaken is an effort to rationalize all those learnings and all the infrastructure we built around that. And PwC is actually going to market, partnering with our friends at UiPath and others with a platform called ProEdge, which is really meant to help clients enable their citizen-led journey, both from a learning and digital asset scaling perspective. And I think it's important, and I think it's a bit of a mind shift for a lot of our clients as you're looking at the question about how you scale automation program and who needs to be at the table for that conversation. When you're bringing the upskilling topic and that purpose around filling the skills gap to the surface, it's bringing probably a different crowd on the client side than maybe the person who typically runs the automation COE. You're getting into kind of overall business transformation leaders, CHRO, people strategy leaders, others in the organization who are all trying to crack this question. And we think it's a really good way in how to kind of bring the nitty gritty of what we love to talk about with automation to the C-level strategy and surface.
Yeah, what you're doing with ProEdge is really impressive, and I think your clients are benefiting from your early days in pioneering in the space. So it's awesome, and it's great to be partnered on that. Kevin, we're just about out of time, but last question, real quick: if you were to go back a couple of years in the past and you got to talk to your past self, what's the one piece of advice that you would give yourself, knowing what you know now?
There's obviously a lot that could be covered in there, but I would, from my perspective, cracking the upskilling challenge and how you actually do that, and there's different facets to it. What type of learning? How are you delivering the learning? How are you segmenting the workforce into how you would sequence this? It's hard to hit kind of everyone at once. What are the different personas? And then how are you rewarding people, and how are you measuring what people are doing over the long run? Making that kind of the primary focus. I think it's, as automation practitioners, it's very easy to get caught up in the nitty gritty around, okay, how do I manage, 50,000 bot runners, and how do I, what's the governance, and all these other questions that are important. But I think getting that people part right kind of makes everything else kind of happen naturally.
I love it. Your advice was around the people, not the technology. That's really, really illuminating.
Yeah, that is.
Awesome. Great.
Well, we have, the time has just flown. Like my favorite dad says, time flies whether you're having fun or not. And I was having fun, so it really flew. But thanks a lot, Kevin. It's great to see you again.